A quick reminder, guys and gals, if you want to send me a video for the 500th episode where I'm going to make a montage of people's jazz experiences, the jazz they love, why they appreciate this channel, 2-3 minutes long, you can send it to my email address at vaneijl.com, yahoo.com, which is VANEIJL, VANEIJL at yahoo.com. Or you can send it to me via Dropbox, or Facebook Messenger also works, I think. So send me your videos, and I'll share them with people in the episode 500. It'll help put faces to some names for all of us. So just a reminder to do that. That's coming up within a week and a half here or so. Appreciate you all. Peace. Good morning, everybody. How are we doing today? Pops says hello. In the background, we have a little bit of a Pacific Records sampler called Ballads. Nice little cover. It's a nice little collection of soft, accessible music for someone trying to discover jazz. Speaking of Pacific Records, I do want to share with you a record I just received the other day. Carmel Jones, Business Meeting. This is a little bit later in the Pacific Jazz PJ series, number 53. And when you start getting to the 40s and 50s, I'm starting to miss some titles in there. What a great label. Pacific is one of the more underappreciated title labels today. Thankfully, Tone Poet's doing some of the Pacific Jazz stuff. But like Contemporary that I was talking about last month, a lot of the Pacific and Contemporary stuff sold pretty well. So most of it's out there to be found. It wasn't like there wasn't any copies of this to find when I decided I wanted to get it. I love Carmell Jones. He has a great record on Prestige called Jayhawk, Talk or something like that. Something Jayhawk with reference to his Kansas roots. He ends up mostly on the West Coast scene. I think he works with Curtis Amy a little bit. I'm guessing that's Gerald Wilson on the front there, the great arranger who takes a big part on this record. It's certainly not the piano player Frank Strazzeri, who was credited on the piano here. But Harold Land and Bud Shank show up here. Frank Strazzeri on the piano, Ron Jefferson's on the drums, Leroy Vinnegar's on the bass. All in all, some pretty serious players. A nice, wonderful, modern session by a nice trumpet player who was in the vein of Kenny Dorham, but a little cooler. Kenny's a little bit more at unrest, at unease. Dorham has some social values I feel like coming across in what he's saying at times, and more politically charged. Again, he's an East Coast guy. East Coast stuff definitely seems to be a bit more similar how the hip-hop stuff was. East Coast was intellectual and dealing with the rights of blacks and what was happening in America in the 80s into the 90s. And the West Coast stuff came up much more cool, if you would, from NWA to Snoop Dogg and Dre and Pac. That stuff all had a really pop, cool sensibility to it if you think about it. That stuff sounds very cool, almost like that Snoop Dogg record's almost comic. It's so lighthearted now, and it was really threatening at the time. But the East Coast, West Coast thing seems to kind of transcend for some reason. It's hard to really put a thumb on why. But the East Coast guys all seem to be a bit like the Native Tongue, all those De La Soul, Tribe Called Quest, Diggable Planets. Those guys all had intellectual stuff to share. It was just a great time for East Coast hip-hop with intellectual messages coming across. And you feel like Kenny Dorham has some of that coming across in what he's saying and playing, especially when he's with those Blue Note kids. There's a real militancy like a lot of that stuff, as I've said. Next, I want to show you my next order that I just received from Japan. I was so happy with my first record purchase. Well, not my first, but my most recent purchase from Face Records in Japan. I bought a few things at their last auction as well. And again, they always have an auction going. Before one ends, they're already listing the next auction, so it's pretty much perpetually in motion. And one of the cool features is you don't have to pay for what you buy for up to 2 weeks, so you can keep adding stuff from the next auction and bundling it all together, like I said, to get a great deal. Again, they shipped it via DHL, which is a great way to go because you end up getting your records in under a week. And I don't like having to wait for something I buy for 4, 5, 6 weeks, which happens sometimes. That's disappointing. And when you can get that stuff within a week, shit, the U.S. Post isn't that responsible sometimes. So it's always nice when you get that stuff promptly. So with no further ado, let me show you some things I picked up here. And again, this is fresh unboxing. I've not seen these yet. They just came DHL yesterday. My mother-in-law was in town yesterday for Mother's Day, and thus I was preoccupied keeping my wife and her mother entertained and from having to be without a referee, let's just say. So first here I got on a really weird little label, Contact, this Earl Hines record with Elvin Jones and Richard Davis. Contact was a cool label. If I remember, I think it's Bob Thiel from Impulse launches Contact in 62, 63 in there somewhere. And there's some really great titles on that label, but there's only about 6 titles. And then they just kind of go away. They, again, are doing the gatefold, like Impulse and like Verve. And like I said, I think this is a Bob Thiel project, if I remember. Stanley Dance. I'm not seeing... I see Stanley Dance, the reviewer here. But I do think it was a Bob Thiel, the Impulse guy, that was in charge of these records. You didn't even have a similar feel and color scheme and tonality. Again, there's a Shelly Manne, there's a Duke Ellington, there's another Earl Hines. It seems like a place where they're putting some of the more traditional guys, but in very modern settings with modern players, with Elvin Jones and Richard Davis. And without question, Earl Hines, Father Hines, is one of the most important players in jazz and piano, in the modernization of jazz. He plays with Armstrong back in the 20s, and he's a very innovative player even then. Even Armstrong thought so, which is saying something because Armstrong is the definition of innovation. And Hines is a Pittsburgh guy, and he kind of really fathers a lot of young kids, a bit like Lionel Hampton. He's one of those cats that always had a band that was always bringing in young, new black talent. And Hines is someone that deserves more credit in today's jazz universe. The next piece I got is a piece I've bid on numerous times for a domestic pressing, and it's always gotten a little bit out of my reach. It's the interpretations of Tal Farlow. And Tal is one of the great guitar players of this era. I'm not a huge fan of buying Verve from Japan because there are available here in America, but this one's always kind of eluded me. You have to spend a little time researching what release this was because their numbers aren't going to correlate, which is true for most Japanese labels. They're going to replicate the numbers, the labels and the covers, everything really accurately, but they almost always apply a new number to it for their own sequence numbers, and so it doesn't have the original Verve number on it. If I remember, this one's 8,000. It could be in the 8200s, maybe. I can't remember. Great cover. I think it's a David Stone Martin. Pretty sure it is. It's a great cover. Tal was called the Octopus because he had these giant hands, which allowed him to do chording and play some things that a lot of other guys just couldn't even play comfortably. And so he's a real important figure in guitar jazz. And he's a bit overlooked today, I must admit. Another record that's always kind of escaped me, it's always gone for a little bit too much for my liking here in North America, is Pike's Peak by the Dave Pike Quartet. And Dave Pike is a great vibraphonist, quite a modern player. He even skirts the edges some and dabbles a little in the avant-garde at times. He has a lot of good records at Prestige New Jazz. He's also got a great record at Atlantic that's really tough to find. The Jet Set Age, I think it's called. That's a tough record to come by. See if we can find the band here. I think this is with Bill Evans. Bill Evans, Herbie Lewis on the bass, and Walter Perkins is on the drums. So a nice quartet. Being this is on Epic, which is a sister of Columbia, it's probably fairly accessible. It's kind of a cool cover, you know. It's a little bit of a harbinger of what ECM starts doing cover-wise. And people sometimes laud the ECM graphic design. I find a lot of them to be very kind of boring and it's too distilled. It's too sterile for me. The impetus for this buy was after I got my last buy and I got that Walter Bishop, which was on that Jazztime label, which has that Duke Pearson and a couple of, I showed that on that last episode, a couple of Dave Bailey records, Bash, and one other one. I thought I might have had all the stuff on Jazztime, Jazzline. Very small label. They were forced to change their name because it was too close to something else. So they changed from, I think, Jazztime to Jazzline. Or it might have been Jazzline to Jazz. I can't remember which one came first, to be honest. So I was looking to see, am I missing anything else on this label now? Now that I have the Walter Bishop and the Duke Pearson, and now that I have both of the Dave Baileys, and I looked up on Discogs, and true enough, there was another one here by a fellow by the name of Rocky Boyd, and I think he's a drummer. And it's all in Japanese, unfortunately. No, Pete LaRocca is on the drums. Rocky Boyd Quintet. It's got Walter Bishop on piano once again, Ron Carter on the bass, Pete LaRocca is on the drums, and then Kenny Dorham, who we just talked about, is on the trumpet. So maybe Rocky Boyd's actually a sax player, because you have trumpet, bass, piano, guitar. Drums. So tell me to think this quintet, he is probably a sax player. And I'll be honest, I bought this because I wanted to have the Jazztime collection and have everything on the label. And as far as I know, I think I have all of it now. Cool cover, Rocky Boyd. I don't know nothing about Rocky Boyd, I'll be honest. But it was on that label, so okay, cool. And then it was coupled with the fact it has the great Kenny Dorham on it. I'm like, well, if it's got Kenny Dorham on it, it's going to be good. Dorham is a really high level of consistency of session work, regardless of what label he's on. And there's not a lot of guys you can say that about. A lot of guys are really impacted by what label they're on. You know, take a guy like King Curtis. His stuff on Prestige is markedly different than a lot of his loungier, more poppy stuff on other labels. So a label can make a big impact on an artist's career. Kenny Dorham didn't seem to matter what label he was on. He was going to always have a fairly high level of sincerity and integrity and a sense of desperation, like I said, and a kind of a political, social ideology that I just connect with. Dorham's a guy kind of mid-range trumpet-wise. He doesn't blow as hard or as bright or even as fast as the Freddie Hubbards and Clifford Browns and Booker Littles. He's not as soft and as milky and as cloudy as a Miles Davis or an Art Farmer. He's more in the middle range. You have Morgan, Donald Byrd. Kenny Dorham's kind of right there, right in the middle, where he's got some softer tones, a little bit of a cloudy sound at times. But he can also play with some bright ferocity and clarity when he wants to. So he's got multiple facets to his playing. He's a really underrated guy, yet he's still very collectible, so he's not super underrated. A record I've wanted to have for a while, and I've completed, with the exception of one record, the Argo 600 series. 600 up to 750 or so. I have every title except for one. And there's 3 or 4 titles there that were never issued, which have received numbers but didn't get released, which can be confusing because when you look at their discography on Wikipedia, they list those records and those numbers, but they don't exist. And the one I'm missing, that's Cesar Giovannini, I still haven't found it in a couple years of looking. I did see a promo colored vinyl pressing on eBay once, I've told you before, and I bid kind of low on it, $26, and it went for $26.50. So I don't know what I ended up going for. Cesar Giovannini seems to be a fairly lighthearted, almost chamber pianist, judging by his other work on other labels. I'm sure with Argo is going to be a little bit more blues to it, but that being said, this record here is on the Argo 4000 series, which launches a little bit later, probably more like 5960. It's a little bit more blues, R&B tinge than the 600 series, it seems, but the crossover and the clarity of definition isn't really that clear. You get a lot of Etta James on the 4000 series, and you get more Lorez Alexandria singing on the 600 series. Lorez is definitely rhythm the blues and jazz, and Etta James is more R&B and blues. And it's like I said, it's not a clear definition by any means, but I have less of the 4000 series, what I'm trying to say. And I always wanted this Dodo Marmarosa record. He's a fantastic player. He goes back to the bebop days. I think he even goes back before that. It's always kind of eluded me. The few times I've seen it recently in the wild in record stores, I saw it in Chicago. I felt like the price was a little high for it. I used to see it for $5, $6, $10 all the time. And it was like $30 or $35 for a nice old pressing. So I'm getting this Argo from Japan. Got the actual roll number on everything, even though it is a Japanese pressing. I think I paid $6 for it. Again, I got all these records really cheap. There's only a few I paid anything high for. The Carmel was not part of it. The Rocky Boy was under $10. The Dave Pike was probably around $10. I think the Dodo was $6 or $7. Another Tal Farlow, and both the Tal Farlows came to me. The Earl Hines as well came for $4. The Tal Farlows both came for a real good price. And so again, I'm just driving home the point here that the Japanese are giving you a lot of great jazz vinyl in pristine condition. It's graded immaculately. I've never seen a flawed Japanese pressing. I've never seen one skip. They don't seem to even put that stuff up for auction from what I can tell. So yeah, this is a Tal Farlow, the swinging guitar. And this one maybe is in the 8200s, 8300s again. I have to do my research. And I looked them up once before I bought them to make sure I didn't have them. Tal Farlow does a lot of work for Verve in the mid-50s. He was kind of one of their go-to guys at that point. Just a great player. And again, his older records are starting to creep up in price. And so to get these from Japan for next to nothing seemed a no-brainer. Another Verve record I've bid on numerous times and never really wanted to put the big bucks out for it is this record here by Lee Konitz. Very cool. And this one's, I think, 83.65 in there somewhere. It's towards the modernization of Verve, approaching the Creed Taylor switchover. But I think it's still before that. Konitz, of course, is a very modern player with hints of bebop and a lot of modern, compositionally driven stuff. He plays with guys like Mulligan, and he was part of the Birth of the Cool sessions. So he has that kind of body of work in his resume. He passed quite recently, actually, Lee Konitz. Yeah, I love his work at the Storyville label. He's got a lot of material out there because, he lived for a long time. Again, I always collect the earlier works of people. This is what I never came across for a good price, and I finally got it for, I think I probably paid $7 for that one. It's ridiculous the price some of these go for. And then I also found, in my searching, another Jazztime Jazzline record. And it's the Bags Groove by Duke Pearson Trio. And Duke has an earlier record on Jazztime Jazzline. But this one is a session that wasn't released till a lot later. And exactly the lineage of it, I'm not too certain. Interesting, they have a bunch of Storyville records on the back here. Oh, it's just an insert, sorry. There's an insert here for Storyville, which is a great label. I was just talking about Lee Konitz. But this Duke Pearson Trio stuff with Thomas Howard and Lex Humphreys was recorded in 1961. It says previously unissued by the Jazzline label. And so, having said I almost completed the Jazzline label, seeing this on release one, but it's also given the Jazzline logos and got the old Jazzline label on the vinyl. And so it was actually probably a nice little piece to complete my Jazzline, Jazztime label sequence. So I got some great titles there. Those are great jazz artists. All affordable. I'm not sure I paid $20 for any of those. And that's just a great deal. People are paying so much for jazz today, acting like you can't find good prices. And I showed you with that Discogs buy. I've showed you with these 2 Japan purchases. And the last thing I want to show you is a record that's always been a little bit confusing to me. It's a record on the Signal label. And the Signal label was a nice little indie label that does a small series of records from Duke Jordan. I think it was a G.G. Grice record. And this Hall Overton record was also on Signal. However, Savoy bought the licensing to Signal Records and reissued the Signal stuff around 12/150, I think it is 12/140 in there somewhere. And so they reissue all that, and it's not a lot, it's like 3 or 4 titles of Signal stuff. And the Wikipedia entry for the Savoy discography actually mislabels this as a G.G. Grice record. So my printout, all the time, the number, and I looked at that number, it all says G.G. Grice, and I always thought it must be a repackaging of the G.G. Grice again. And then I would see this Hal Overton record on Signal once in a while. I'm like, I think Savoy must have reissued that, but I was never certain. Anyway, the confusion was cleared up finally. I did a little bit deeper research, and I did find out that this was also, of course, reissued by Savoy, like the other ones, and it was in that number that was labeled as G.G. Grice. I should probably go on Wikipedia and fix that if it hasn't been fixed by now, because I did my Savoy Wikipedia printout 3-4 years back now, so someone could have fixed it by now. But again, Hall Overton with Phil Woods, Nick Stabulus, and Teddy Kotick, bass drums, and alto sax there. I think Hall Overton's a piano player, I'm pretty sure. I'm not sure if it's pronounced Hal or Hall. It's spelled Hall. But, so it's actually a Savoy piece, technically, because of where it was issued, that I didn't have, and I should have had it. And it's actually also, like I said, the Signal label, which has that little ear logo. So this is a good piece. And I think I paid $18 for it. And boy, the old Signals of that go for hundreds and hundreds of dollars if you come across it, if you can find it. So again, the point is, you don't have to break an arm and sell your kidneys to get old jazz records that are great. You just don't have to. You don't have to sit around and wait for the reissue labels and the YouTube community to say, oh, here's a new reissue, you have to have it. Do your own research and find great stuff on Discogs used, great stuff from Japan that's next to new in condition almost every time. The Japanese stuff is pristine. And the prices, if you ain't buying Coltrane and Miles and Hank Mobley, the prices for all that stuff is really, really, really affordable. And I'm actually involved in another auction now at Face. I've already won like 7 items on that one. And I have a few more. And I'm actually probably creating myself some competition on some of these pieces I'm buying. But I did want to share this with you guys. I think it's important. I think there's too much misinformation out there right now. Too many people acting like you can't buy anything but the same records everybody else is buying. And there's just so much more to the jazz story than that. And like I said, if you want a great measuring stick of what the jazz canon looks like, what the Japanese have reissued is the jazz canon. And they go to every label and they reissue every good jazz title. I mean, it's so extensive. Since I've been talking about it, I've been trying to think of records or titles or labels that they don't have represented. And there's a few things that I think I've seen over the years that aren't reissued in Japan. So you have to either go to England or Europe to get it, maybe. Fresh Sounds, maybe. The Fresh Sound out of Spain, I think, does a few titles that Japan doesn't do. That seems to be in my experience. But the Japanese have reissued so much of the jazz canon. It's really impressive. And it's a great place to shop. And I guarantee they will all sound immaculate. You're not going to get a beat up, dinged up pressing that's not going to sound good. It's just not part of the Japanese record experience at all. So that's today's episode. We're going to get back to some other fun stuff. I got more of the Legacy series coming up. There's just been a lot of things going on. So hope you all had a good Mother's Day weekend. Happy Mother's Day to all you moms out there. Like I said the other day, y'all be safe. If you want to support the channel, go to the Patreon and pledge a few dollars. If you want to buy a t-shirt or a hoodie, that's always appreciated. That's in the description below as well. Y'all be safe. I'll talk to you probably on Thursday, I'm guessing. Peace.